Prosecutor, I would go to court. Blessed be the Lord, my strength, who teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight. This is Great Awakenings, and we're joined once again by the great Stephen Pidgeon. We're going to be walking through a lot of the issues that are confronting the world today, especially around Ukraine, the bombings, the attacks, the intrusion up there, what this means, also Netanyahu, Israel, and the new World Health Organization's new pandemic, scandemic, psyop, whatever you want to call it, as well as the Kursk issue and all sorts of other things. So, Stephen Pidgeon, it's good to be with you, and I'll let you give us your opening salvo. It sounds like we've got some torpedoes coming at us.
Yes, we do. You know, the infrastructure was constructed during the Trump administration in 2020, when Trump gave the podium to, in my opinion, unindicted main conspirator, Anthony Fauci. And Fauci was engineering a crime against humanity at an epic scale, maybe the greatest scale we've ever seen, maybe the greatest crime ever committed, which was to cause the world to fear the common cold. And in that fear, to introduce really horrific emergency authorized use of vaccines, which were horrific, quite frankly. And since that has happened, we have seen millions and millions of people die, and very few of them died from actually COVID, the common cold. And COVID, SARS-2 is actually the so-called name of the virus, may not even have been a virus. It's very possible that it was an exosome, which was ionization poisoning from the deployment of 5G. That's very possible that that's what it was. But nonetheless, a protocol was developed and 15 billion was moved from the federal government into the hands of big pharma. That money to grease the skids. And suddenly people like Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, became $25 million richer in 1 year, while she imposed a vaccine mandate on the country. Boris Johnson was able to purchase a $38 million house after he left the position of prime minister with cash. One wonders how that occurred. And so there were a number of people whose skids were greased. And as a result, some of the abuses, like Matt Hancock in the UK, absolutely a person who deserves to be in prison. He deserves to be in prison for what he did, and laughing about it all the way. And I don't know how you get that insulated. I guess you do it if you live in London and you live in a small apartment or something, and you only go to work and back. I don't know. But he got insulated and isolated from everybody else in England, and he abused them to his great pleasure and joy. Now, you know, Tedros, who is, in my opinion, a psychopathic, homicidal maniac, genocidal maniac, who has joined the forces of Bill Gates and others on a proposition to reduce the world's population. That is their goal, to reduce the world's population. And they're not planning on doing it by means of abortion or sterilization, although that is part of the protocol. There's three things that are pre-childbirth that they're advancing. Of course, homosexuality, abortion, and sterilization. And any one of those three can prevent the birth of a child. So they're advancing those three as much as possible. California now is considering abortion up to a week after the child is born. This, of course, is actually infant sacrifice, on par with the biblical worship of Molech. It's infant sacrifice, and it's going to bring absolutely the wrath of Yah upon the whole state of California.
Well, upon the whole nation too, because if the Supreme Court rules in favor of that, then the child doesn't have any rights after a week of birth. That's the damnation that's coming upon this country, and he's allowing us to unfold this in our laws and our courts.
Well, we have no choice because we have a Talmudic hook in our jaw.
Yeah.
And no one wants to talk about this, but it's a well-known fact that George Bush signed a House resolution into law in 1991, approving of what's called the Noahide laws. The Noahide laws were rabbinic construction that were created by Maimonides in the 14th century, and they assert the supremacy of Jews over the Goyim. The Goyim, as was taught by Menachem Schneerson, the head of Chabad Lubavitch, who is considered the Messiah, whose picture is up all over Israel, and who anointed Benjamin Netanyahu to be the Messiah during his lifetime. Schneerson was quoted as saying, in Hebrew, of course, where the American audience couldn't hear it, that the Jews have two souls, the Goyim have one. The only reason Goyim are on the earth is to serve the Jew. They're just cattle and they need to be treated accordingly. And this kind of racial supremacy, which is what it is. I mean, I'm not talking about Judaism one way or the other, but that particular remark is racial supremacy. It's a supremacist, totally racist idea and view. And their conclusion is that the Goyim are only deserving of what they call the Noahide laws. These are 7 laws created by Maimonides, a rabbi in the 14th century, that George Bush signed a House resolution in 1991 saying that these were the foundation of all morality in America. These were the foundation of all morality in America, not the 10 Commandments, but these 7 rabbinical laws. Now, the underlying premise behind that is that rabbis are the ultimate moral authority in America, not scripture, and of course, not our Messiah, but rabbis. And since that was signed into law, immediately thereafter, we were given the presidency, the adulterous presidency of Bill Clinton, a serial rapist, including a rapist who engaged in violent forms of rape. And multiple times, I think there were 42 accusations, and at least 3 of them were accusations of violent rape, including the accusation of Juanita Broderick, who gave a very detailed account of her violent rape at the hands of Bill Clinton. This was, no, everybody turned a blind eye to his adulterous conduct. I mean, there were literally hundreds and hundreds of women with whom he'd had sexual contact that his wife knew about. And the country turned a blind eye to it. And following him, we got George Bush, who then brought in the Patriot Act, destroyed habeas corpus, and put us on the path of the Third Reich. And following him, we were given Barack Obama, who waged war against the United States. Now, after Barack Obama began waging war against the United States for 8 years and was quite successful in doing so, this was followed by Donald Trump, who was moving along in a certain direction. And then suddenly at the end of 2019 and 2020, he agreed to this idea of a pandemic. We did the idea of this pandemic, saying, I'm going to go ahead and move ahead with this pandemic, but I can handle it, right? I can handle it. I can handle it by bringing in Operation Warp Speed. We'll just bring in this vaccine. We'll get everybody vaccinated. We'll get everybody out of there. Now, this is a health phobe, right? A health phobia that he had that, but all of a sudden he's talking about the vaccine for everybody. And this initiation of the vaccine, by the way, all of that protocol in the pandemic were violative of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. As you know, you and I went through.
He was given legal notice of.
Yeah, we gave him complete legal notice of it. We laid it out in front of him. And of course, the Brazilian ambassador's wife, who was a representative to the United Nations, was very familiar with that protocol. He dropped it on Trump's desk and said, you need to look at this. And of course, in the case, the seminal case of Abdullah versus Pfizer, a 2012 case in the First Circuit, the judge held that the Universal Declaration of Bioethics and the 1947 Nuremberg Code were international law binding on the United States. So, when you talk about this, I mean, just a couple of things to throw out to you. First of all, Bill Gates and the WHO are now calling for the military to round up mRNA vaccine refusers during this next pandemic. They're not the only ones. This has also come out of the mouth of the WHO spokesperson. Germany is now considering a vaccine passport. And the long and the short of it is that the infrastructure that was erected during the Trump campaign, to which no one could challenge. I mean, I brought 5 lawsuits in every courthouse I could think of to try to challenge this infrastructure, and it was fait accompli. There was no judge that would touch it. They had a hard time discovering whether or not, for instance, I'll just give you an example of some of the cases I brought. We brought a lawsuit against the governor, basically claiming a broad violation of Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, 14th Amendment, First Amendment. It was an improper taking of property in telling people you're non-essential and closing them down. That was a taking that amounted to a taking. In restricting free speech and the right of free assembly, you have to lock down, you have to quarantine, and violating equal protection under the law provided by both in the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, made applicable to the states under the 14th Amendment. And furthermore, that he had no constitutional authority to enact this emergency. The only emergency authority he had was in respect of an invasion or an out-and-out rebellion. Then he could declare an emergency. That didn't stop the governor from shutting down the legislature for 2 years and declaring himself tyrant as he began to move through this quote unquote pandemic. Now, everything that, and I want to point this out here, Scott, because I want to go through this just a little bit, because in the Universal Declaration of Bioethics, in Article 6, okay, any preventative, diagnostic, or therapeutic medical intervention is only to be carried out with the prior, free, and informed consent of the person concerned. Now, when you talk about any preventative medical intervention, a vaccine is preventive medical intervention. You're not trying to address the symptoms of somebody who's sick. You're trying to prevent them from getting sick. A mask is trying to prevent somebody from getting sick. A quarantine of somebody who is not showing symptoms is trying to prevent somebody from getting sick. A PCR test or any other kind of test, you're trying to prevent somebody from getting sick. Social distancing, you're trying to prevent somebody from getting sick. All of those come under the heading of Article 6. So it can only be carried out with the prior, free, and informed consent of the person concerned, based on adequate information. We still don't have adequate information as to what's in the vaxes. We still don't have it, although there's been a lot of research that has looked into it, and Pfizer intentionally withheld it, wanted to withhold it for 75 years. That was their move. The consent should, where appropriate, be express, that is to say, in writing, and may be withdrawn.
Yes.
Person concerned at any time and for any reason without disadvantage or prejudice.
Amen. So you can't fire.
Yeah. So this is the fundamental premise of Article 6, Paragraph 1 of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, mandatory and binding on the United States. Anyone who violates this is committing an international crime against humanity.
Yes.
Okay, that's very important to understand. And I don't care what the rhetoric is that comes out of their mouth. They are engaged in a crime against humanity if they've engaged in this. So this was broad scale. And when I raised this issue before the court, Benjamin Settle, the federal judge in Tacoma at the United States District Court for Washington in Tacoma, he dismissed the case on summary judgment, saying, well, the governor is immune. The governor has 11th Amendment immunity. He has sovereign immunity. He has quasi-immunity. He has absolute immunity.
He doesn't get to violate other people's constitutional rights.
Well, according to this judge, he did. And the judge said that I failed to meet the threshold to demonstrate that, in fact, Jay Inslee was the one in control. He was the only one in control.
Exactly.
He was executive orders. He was the only one in control.
Yes.
And so anyway, that case got dismissed. I filed a lawsuit in front of the state Supreme Court on behalf of all the gymnasium owners who had been closed down.
Yes.
These were owners who keeping the society healthy.
Yes.
What gyms do, they keep the society healthy. And these gym owners have to maintain immaculate places because of all the sweating and all that stuff going.
Yep.
Hygienically, they're very, very clean and very properly run. And anyway, we went in front of the Supreme Court and we said, hey, this is just as a matter of fact, under declaratory judgment, the governor does not have the authority to do this, period. There's nothing in the Constitution allows it. The Supreme Court's word was, your lawsuit borders on frivolousness. You're raising the Constitution? That borders on frivolousness, right? We sued in the state Supreme Court. We sued in Olympia, the state capital. We sued in the Superior Court on the mask mandate. And when we sued on the mask mandate, basically the whole premise of the idea was you can't mandate masks. First of all, they violate Article 6, Paragraph 1 of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics. Secondly, they're non-effective. And so the issue of fact, of course, I don't know if you're familiar with this, Scott, but in the civil procedure, CR 56, Civil Rule 56 is the rule that governs summary judgment. Mm-hmm. And summary standard has long been basically what you're trying to do when you bring a motion for summary judgment is you're telling the judge there's no issue for a jury to hear or no issue for a trier of fact. If you can have a judge trial instead of a jury trial, there's no issue of fact. And because there's no issue of fact, I'm deserving of judgment as a matter of law. Mm-hmm. The facts have to be construed in favor of the non-moving party. What if the non-moving party has alleged facts and there has any credibility to the facts at all, the facts have to be construed in favor of the non-moving party. And if there's disagreement about a material issue, like does a mask prevent the transmission of a virus, you cannot grant summary judgment. It has to be tried in front of the trier of fact, and it has to be heard by a jury. And then you can present evidence, like, for instance, that the box of masks says will not prevent the transmission of a virus, for instance. One fact that could be admitted. As a matter of course. Well, the Supreme Court, the day before we had our hearing, ruled that as a matter of law, masks prevent the transmission of a virus. Okay?
Wow.
So under these circumstances, it's very difficult to move ahead and say, hey, gee, can we get a tribunal to rule on the Constitution? Can we get a tribunal to rule on international law? Can we get tribunals to rule on federal law in support of the international law? Can we get tribunals to act inconsistent or consistent with the decision in Abdullah versus Pfizer? Answer no. Answer no. You're not going to cross the first threshold. You're not getting to the first door. We're kicking you out of here before you get a chance to say anything. Mm-hmm. So why did this happen? Because this infrastructure was set up, a bipartisan infrastructure from a deep state that has no concern and that no longer represents America at all. Period. The U.S. federal government does not represent America. Now, this is consistent with what's happening with our friend Scott Ritter. And of course, where Scott is concerned, here you go. They're saying that he was an unregistered agent of a foreign actor. Which is very interesting because they didn't find that with Hunter Biden, who took $145 million from the Communist Chinese Party. They didn't find Biden, who was taking kickbacks from the Ukrainian government. They didn't find it with Joe Biden, who was getting kickbacks out of Burisma. They didn't find any of that. No, those guys aren't foreign agents acting on behalf of a foreign power. No, Scott Ritter is, because he sent something up saying, yeah, Russia said blah, 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 blah. And so the fact is, I took a look at the idea. I haven't seen any kind of information or indictment, but as far as I can tell, the information is very, very scant and relies on implication.
Yes.
It relies on implication and interpretation of something that Scott posted rather than the hard facts of, gee, he's an agent. Now,
the only thing they have to say is that because the United States government, the State Department under Obama, defined RT, Russia Today, as an organ of the Russian government because it is funded by the Russian government, therefore anything that he takes from them, money in any way, for any article, regardless of the subject matter, is paying him directly from the Russian government, being directed through RT, but technically he's being paid by the Russian government to write articles, regardless of the subject matter. And we've named RT as a foreign intelligence part of the Russian government. Therefore, he's being paid by the Russian government. That's the real shallow simplicity of their case, I believe.
Yeah. Well, truly what I think really happened to Scott is that I think that there was a reference made, a referral made from a certain senator.
Lindsey Graham, I have no doubt. Lindsey Graham, as he sodomized himself, and no doubt some of the other neocon Zionists have went apoplectic over his writing on Israel as well as his writing on Ukraine. And he's right. Scott Ritter is right on everything that I've seen him write and say. And in fact, he's just a little bit too gung-ho on his pageantry and support for the U.S. government. And I think he made some very terrible errors when he was interviewed by these FBI agents for 5 hours. You don't allow them to interview in any way, shape, or form. But he had a conversation for 5 hours with them, and I think they're going to hang him based on that.
Well, you remember I mentioned to you before that there would be an interrogation the last time we talked about this, and truly, I like to use the following phrase when the police ask me questions. I know better than to answer any questions. Just give it a little Gene Wilder. I know better than to answer any questions. And the truth is that, one guy put it up very clearly, which is that, when you're driving on the highway, you have a duty to show license and registration. Okay.
But if
But
you're traveling, it's a little different, right? We won't get into that, but they're having arguments about.
that nuance has been overturned by the Supreme Court recently, basically saying all the existing jurisprudence that existed on traveling, on the traveling issue, have been overturned.
Mhm.
And if they've been overturned, again, I think it's nonsense in terms of the jurisprudence, but I'm not on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
When you look to the idea of when a police officer pulls you over, you have a duty to show them license and registration. But you do not have a duty to consent to a search of your car or to answer questions.
Nope.
And first thing you should tell the police officer is, as a general rule officer, and I'm invoking that rule here, I don't consent to searches and I don't answer any questions. Thank
Right.
you. And then
Right.
roll up and then behave yourself and don't
Yep.
answer questions. Now, you have to remember that under the search warrant jurisprudence, there's exceptions. There's 22 exceptions to the search warrant.
Mhm.
One of them is a search pursuant to arrest.
Mhm.
You're under arrest. Now we're going to search your vehicle. Well, the fact is you can search the wingspan of the driver and you can't search beyond that. So that doesn't mean they can search a locked glove compartment and it doesn't mean they can search a locked trunk. Okay,
Mhm.
just require a warrant. And
Mhm.
what a lot of times an officer will ask you, is there anything in here I should know about? The correct answer is, I know better than to answer any questions.
Right.
And lawyer, 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 lawyer.
Yep.
Did have I mentioned my lawyer yet? And as soon as you invoke the lawyer that you want you want to be represented by counsel,
Yeah.
prohibited under the Miranda warning rhetoric that from asking any more questions. Up here in Alaska, it's really quite strident. Not only do you have to provide a Miranda warning, but you have to ensure that the person you're talking to understands what you talked about, and it has to be on video.
Yeah.
Because, there's 65 languages spoken in the Anchorage School District.
Yeah.
You give a guy a Miranda warning, you don't know if he understood a single word you said.
Mhm.
So you can't just walk into court and say, I gave him the Miranda warning, Your Honor. Then he told me all this other stuff. It doesn't work. Not in Alaska. You have to you have to demonstrate clearly on video that the person you're interviewing understands what you're talking about. Now, this isn't the case in California or other places, but when you invoke a lawyer and the officer continues to talk to you after you've said, I want a lawyer, and you might even articulate it and say, it's 12:11 p.m. on the afternoon of June 14th, 2022, and I am invoking my right to counsel. I want a lawyer.
Mhm.
Anything that is said after that is inadmissible under the exclusionary rule, right? It's
Mhm.
excluded. It's not admissible evidence, supposedly.
Mhm.
Okay, so one has to be careful about search pursuant to arrest. Do
Mhm.
not allow somebody, even if you're under arrest and they decide they're going to open up your glove compartment or they're going to open up your trunk, you need to make it clear to the arresting officer that is not a search pursuant to an arrest. It's an unlawful search.
Mhm.
Okay, so with all that being said, when you have somebody come in and apparently Scott, they had the SWAT team show up, right?
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, a SWAT team showing up without probable cause to make an arrest is an extreme level of harassment
Yeah.
and intentional infliction of emotional distress
That's right.
worthy of damages. Okay. But nonetheless, this is the kind of stuff that goes on. So where Scott is concerned, and again, like I was talking about the Trump convictions, right? These 39 trumped up felonies, right? Well, you overvalued your property, in your opinion. I mean, look, I've done lots and lots of trials, Scott.
Mhm.
Do a trial, particularly when you've got like a divorce trial going on, or you're seeing a partnership breakup or a
Mhm.
corporation breakup.
Mhm.
You have competing expert witnesses come on the stand,
Yeah.
coming on the stand to tell you, well, what's the value of the corporation? So, for instance, we did a case. I'm not going to get into the details of the case, but although it is in the public record, it was an open trial.
Mhm.
We did a case where one of the expert witnesses came in on behalf of the plaintiff and testified that the plaintiff's damages were $15 million. My expert witness, looking at the exact same facts, testified that the plaintiff's damages were $2,300.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's quite disparity, isn't it? But
Yes, indeed.
when you're talking about a private held company, you're talking about private held property, you're talking about real estate, depending on the time of year. Have you ever had your house appraised? You ever had your house appraised by more than one appraiser?
Mhm.
And one appraiser looks at these as comparables, another appraiser looks at these as comparables. This one might have done it 4 months earlier. This one might do it 6 months later. The valuation may have gone radically up or gone radically down, depending on what the circumstances are. And depending on the comps were, depending on the inspection, depending on this, the appraiser's opinion of that, the appraiser's opinion of this, right? And so what you see almost in every trial I've ever done where there's a division of the assets, there's at least two expert witnesses talking about the appraised value, and they all disagree with each other. So the trial with Trump would say, oh, you overappraised your property. Well, in your opinion. Well, our expert witness says it was only worth this. Well, my expert witness, who filed these as tax returns in front of the IRS, which has done so without anybody complaining, is worth this. So what are you talking about? Well, we're going to convict you on 39 felony counts. Okay, when somebody who was, think about this, Scott, in an objective world. You have an ex-president of the United States sitting before you who has no conviction record. You convict him on these 39 identical counts, and then are you going to send this guy to prison?
Yeah, they will. They will. They're going to find him guilty. I'm sorry. I can just sense that you know this too. The judge is going to call him in at sentencing, and he's going to say a Shakespearean speech, the judge, in the name of democracy, to preserve America and to send a message to the generations to come that a president is not above the law. I am sentencing you to jail time. And it could be, a year, 2 years, 5 years. I think it'll be 10 years. I think he will be sentenced to jail. So they have the drama of taking off his coat, taking off his belt, putting him in handcuffs with Secret Service around him. I don't know how much value they are, but they will take him out of that courtroom and put him into jail. This is my guess. I wish I wasn't, I hope it doesn't happen. I wish it doesn't. I pray it doesn't, but I think it will. They will put him in handcuffs and take him off to jail, because appeals, you don't get an instant appeal. You don't get bail pending appeal until it's heard again. So you're talking bail pending appeal. When does that happen? 30 days from now? And he will be possibly killed in jail. Then we go down the domino effect of what else happens. Is Kamala Harris going to get killed, and her vice president killed, and they're going to bring in someone else to replace them? Gavin Newsom, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, all the above. But I'll just end it by saying I believe he will be sentenced to jail, and they will put him from the courtroom into jail.
Well, I understand the showcase of it. I think the appropriate sentence for Donald Trump, given no prior convictions and given the nature of these convictions, would be some kind of a fine and some kind of a restriction, probation for a year or 2 years.
But see, this isn't a fair judge, Steve. This is a vicious, wicked, demon-possessed Democrat who is on the payroll and doing what he's told by the higher-ups, I believe. I mean, I'm sad to say it, but I'm looking at it like a completely a political conspiracy to bury him by Democrats.
I mean, I agree with you. The likelihood of what you're saying is probably very true. Although I can tell you, and I don't know what Trump's lawyers are doing, but it strikes me that given the recent Supreme Court holding, that, if I were his lawyer, which I'm not, and I'm not giving legal advice, it's just a suggestion, okay? Because I'm not attached to him, and besides that, he doesn't listen to me anyway. But I'm just out. If I were in the same circumstance as him, I would go into federal court seeking an injunction to bind the state court from acting arbitrarily.
Yeah.
And I would seek the injunction on a whole bunch of bases. I mean, one is it appears to be an attempt to manipulate a federal election.
Yep.
Number two, it appears to be arbitrary and capricious. Number three, there's all kinds of errors that are incident, like for instance, the fact that there was a forum nonconvenience motion brought, and the change of venue motion, and the venue was denied, the motion was denied, and then they proceeded to execute an absolutely biased trial. So in those circumstances, I think there is enough ground to put together an affidavit, and in the right federal courthouse. And maybe the federal courthouse is the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, because really the only true federal courthouse in the country.
Yeah.
Is, as you know, the District of Columbia is an incorporated entity that is the corporate general partner governing the limited partnership that we call the United States of America. So the United States District Court, probably in the District Court of Columbia, would be the forum that I would choose if it were me in that same situation.
Well,
And
it opens up other things too. He is the president of the United States formally. If he's put into custody, his Secret Service agents have to be with him 24/7. They need to inspect the food he eats and the things he drinks. His entire environment has to be in a skiff, essentially, all
yeah,
the time.
it is not going to work. Rikers Island is not going to happen. And so that's why I think this is just, I believe this is just pure fantasy myself on the part of this judge, this state court judge in New York. But like I say, I mean, yeah, I mean, and technically, again, if it were me, if I were the judge that was sentencing him, given his status as the former president of the United States, even if I wanted to put him in jail, I would put him in some minimum security facility where the Secret Service would have, readily attached places where the Secret Service would be staying and guarding and protecting him and so on and so forth. That'd have to be 24/7 protection.
They would he would be in isolation. I've been in a minimum security. I know what they're like. He would not be allowed to be have a bunk mate, right? It's not his wife, it's a stranger. He may talk in his sleep, national secrets. Sorry, that's a danger. So he has to be isolated in an isolated place, and the Secret Service have to be around that place, and no one else can come in to that place.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare, and it's never been done, of course, but it's a nightmare. But my fear is we're no longer in the United States of America. We are now on the twilight as the sun of truth and light and liberty and all that is dipping below the horizon. What's rising up is this Bolshevik, demonic, bizarro world.
Yeah, it's not even, there's nothing rising right now. What's taking place is the cancer is overtaking the body, and what you're seeing is just a giant tumor.
Yes.
Dmitry Orlov had a great conversation the other day, and I thought the conversation was really quite good as he was discussing the fact that the United States is already a failed state. This is a
Yes.
failed,
Yes.
and the fact that Kamala Harris can come out with AI doctored, completely fraudulent videos that, where she has, an AI background jet behind her. She's got an AI induced audience where there's nobody there. She's got only the people there are paid supporters. She's paying advertising.
Yes.
I mean, all of this stuff is ridiculous, and she's lying to the public in
Yes.
such, it's not just lying, it's absolute fraud. It's
Yeah.
criminal. And now Joe Biden is complaining his head off, saying that Nancy Pelosi forced him to bow out of the Democratic nomination. And of course, Nancy Pelosi is the one running the the DNC, and she is the one who illegally signed off on Barack Obama. Her and Howard Dean were the ones that signed off saying that Barack Obama was constitutionally eligible to run for office. The liability for his incompatibility to be the president because he couldn't prove his American citizenship lies with Nancy Pelosi and Howard Dean, who perjured themselves in affidavits in both Arizona and Hawaii. They have since rigged the elections in both of those states, so they don't have to worry about anything in those states.
Mm-hmm.
The New York Times and other mass media has come out and said that Kamala Harris is going to win the election because she has already 48% of the votes. She's going to win New York and Pennsylvania and California, Oregon, and Washington. She couldn't get 1% of the vote in the Democratic primary, but they're going to say she's getting 48% of the vote. Why are they saying that? Because they've rigged the election in all of those states.
Yep.
Those elections are already rigged. They're already fixed. So what election? There is no election.
That's right.
No election. There's not an election. What goes on in the United States is not an election. It is a foregone AI conclusion. The votes have already been cast, and your name has already been assigned to a vote, and that's that.
So it leads us to, and I know we've been talking about this, but I always want to bring it up because it's almost like practicing a martial art, a defensive martial art. There have to be defensive legal maneuvers, legal declarations, affidavits, documents, legal statements, legal, lawful, constitutional presentations that people make individually to inoculate themselves and defend themselves and reject, like you said, an injunction is cutting off of this illegal action against Trump in a state court. There have to be kind of proactive injunctions that people can deploy, can assert, can establish that can serve as some sort of firewall or breaker So this can't come, in this overwhelming tyrannical fashion. That's what they're gearing up for, is a tyrannical, fascistic, Noahide laws sort of militancy against the American people. Oh, it can't happen? Want to fucking bet? You know how it happens? Oh, MSNBC just reported a nuclear event on the southern border by Iran. We think Iran blew up the Twin Towers in Texas or Oklahoma or wherever they have. Oh, we just got a report the Iranians did this, so now we need to. Now
Well,
we're going to do all these things. So there
Google,
have to be proactive defensive measures.
Google is already reporting that Iran is hacking the American election. And Trump went along with this narrative that Iran was the one planning his assassination. We know who was planning his assassination. We know exactly who it was, and we know why it was, and that's why J.D. Vance got the vice president nomination. This is no secret to us. But then to come out and start lying and say that the Iranians were the ones planning the assassination, it's
And to
just
say if they kill him in the future, I hope America will wipe them off the map, Trump said on Truth Social.
yeah. Well, I mean, again, this is a huge, huge, this is the demonization of people who have done nothing to you.
Mhm.
Demonized Gaddafi, you know, and we did other things. And so, I mean, the thing is that, Scott, when it comes down to it, is this, we have a real moral crisis in front of us. And the moral crisis we have in front of us is that the Israelis put a hook in the jaw of America in 1991.
Yes,
And they've been pulling that hook ever since.
yes.
Scott Ritter says, well, you did something with RT, therefore you're an agent of a foreign power. But AIPAC is not an agent of a foreign power who takes direct funding from the nation of Israel, who got that funding from the American Congress, who then distributes that funding to the American congressman, saying, if you don't take this money and we don't back you, you're going to be out of office, just like some of the squad, I think that's what they call them, the squad,
Yes.
that's already lost the election, right? Because they took the wrong position on Israel.
Yes.
And so here you can see AIPAC having this, wandering aimlessly over the top of the Foreign Agents Reporting Act, while Ritter gets nailed for doing a video on RT, right? And so when you see that kind of a thing, the whole idea is that this nation now has moved in the direction of radical Talmudism. Let me give you an example, Scott. The Talmud is the document that says there's 6 sexes. Okay. The Talmud is the document that says there's 8 genders. There's no other document on earth that says that, but the
Mhm.
Talmud says it. The Bible, scripture says that Yah created them male and female, he created. And there's two sexes in scripture. In
Yes.
Genesis, in the 4 gospels, it's mentioned that they were created, male and female, that they were created, 2 sexes, right? But there is a document that says there's 6 sexes. And that document has a flag. It's a 6-colored flag reflecting the 6 colors. And then when you look at the latest advanced flag, that shows both the 6 colors and the 8 genders all in one flag. You see,
Mhm.
this flag represents the assertion of Talmudic supremacy over a Christian society. It's
Mhm.
supremacy. You see, it has nothing to do with sexual preference. It has to do with ideology and the controlling ideology. And that ideology became more and more and more controlling to the point that we lost the Defense of Marriage Act. That was reversed. And then domestic partnerships came in 2010. And then same-sex marriage came in 2012. And with same-sex marriage came a whole host of constitutional rights for sexual orientation, which the Supreme Court said, in addition to LGBTQ, there's at least 4 other orientations that are protected in the immortal words of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a radical atheist Talmudist. So what takes place from there is now we've cascaded down this fecal slide into pig slop.
Mhm.
And we're almost, even though they promised, they said, oh, look, we just want domestic partnerships. We just want the same rights everybody else has. Then as soon as they got that, well, we have to have same-sex marriage on exactly the same terms you have. And as soon as they got that, well, we've got people that want to slip on a dress and go into little girls' locker rooms. And as soon as they got that, oh, I'm a guy and I want to beat up on girls in Olympic sports,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
now the push is to decriminalize pedophilia and to make the argument that children as young as 7 years old can consent to a sexual relationship with an adult, right? This is what's on the table, and the practice of infant sacrifice in the public square. You see, we've arrived. We've
At a
arrived.
week after birth, they can be aborted.
Yeah,
there's your introduction to infant sacrifice, to the Baal.
Yeah, to Baal. That's what it is. This is infant sacrifice. We've arrived. We've hit the bottom. We've slid all the way to the bottom. We're face down in the pig slop, and it smells like it, right? And I mean, the recent Pride Festival in San Francisco, was just over the top, right? A guy laying down in the swimming pool and inviting some 20 people to urinate on him and rolling around in the urine. Open homosexual sex in the street with children present. All of this stuff was going on in this parade, and nobody saw any problem with that. Well, this kind of thing that's happening now has put us in a position where the nation is over. This is what Dmitry Orlov was saying. It is a failed state. Now, economically, we haven't failed yet, but we're going to. It's going to be an absolute destruction that is coming because there is nothing left. There is no glue to hold this society together. But equally important, and I think this is where I'm going here, the kind of things that have taken place in Gaza, the brutality that's happened really since the assassination of the mediator for Hamas in Iran.
Yes.
Israel has not stopped with its brutality in Gaza, not. For 1 minute.
Nope.
They bombed an open street of pedestrians, killing over 100 people.
Yep. Bomb to school. And the
Bombed
UN representative of Israel has the gall to say Israel is the most moral nation on earth. Are you listening, Palestinian representative? And of course, China and Russia and Algeria, they all jumped in. That was the Israeli representative.
Thinking in Israel is that they have a God-given grant to the land, and not just talking about this area, formerly called Palestine.
No.
We're talking about an area that goes from the Nile River to the Euphrates River, called Greater Israel.
All the people in Israel support this action by Netanyahu.
Yeah, because they believe that the Palestinians are less than human beings.
Yep.
They're less than human beings. They're human beings, and the Palestinians are not. Even though the DNA shows that the Palestinians may be the true descendants of the house of Yasharel. Yeah. They may be the true Jews. They may be the true Benjamites, the true Levites. And these are these people whose children are being blown up. I saw videos today of people picking up the body parts of infants and putting them in plastic bags. I know you saw that video. Mm-hmm. And the difficulty with America, and now, what did America do yesterday? We transferred 6,500 JDAMs to Israel. 6,500 JDAMs. Now, there's already been twice the number of munitions dropped in Gaza that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Twice the munitions. And now we brought in another 6,500 JDAMs. Well, who are they going to use those on? 6,500 bomb blasts? Who are they going to use those on? And so for me, this is an immorality of such huge proportion. I have to divorce myself from it. I have nothing to do with that. Now, yes. There's an interesting passage in Scripture, Scott, where David got into a battle. David took over the kingdom of Judah, and Shaul was running the northern kingdom, and he dies in battle, and he is succeeded by a warrior named Avner. And Avner comes down to visit David. David writes him and says, hey, look, you might think you're the king of the whole of the tribes of Yasharel, but I've been anointed king in Judah, in Yehuda. And Avner says, well, let me come down and visit. So Avner comes down, and while he's there, he says, why don't we have a dozen of my guys, spar with a dozen of your guys? And so they do. Well, that immediately gets out of hand. And the three brothers, Joab and his two brothers, just start killing them. And they kill all 12 of these guys. And 9 of the Israelis are killed, and all 12 of the northern kingdom guys are killed. And so at this point, now Avner leaves, and this is going to go into a civil war. And it's a huge protracted battle that goes on for a long time, a war of attrition between David and Abner. And then, of course, what happens is Abner comes back and he goes back to the son of Saul, who's pretending he's the king. But he was the crippled one. He was the one who had bad feet. He couldn't walk.
Yeah, yeah.
Ishbosheth. And so he comes to him and Ishbosheth says, hey, what's this I hear about you sleeping with my father's concubine? And Abner says, you're accusing me after I've defended you and put you on the throne, after I've waged all these battles? Fine. I'm going to capitulate and give the whole kingdom to David. So he does. He gives the kingdom to David. Well, Joab decides, I'm not putting up with that. And as soon as David and Abner reach an accord, and David says, okay, Abner, thank you. Go in peace. We'll see you later. Abner's going home. Joab goes and kills him. Okay, he kills him. Now, this was morally unacceptable for David. And so David went to his own people and he said, I had nothing to do with that.
Yeah. And
I am going to call a memorial feast on behalf of Abner. We are going to, it's going to be a Shabbat. We are going to sit down. We're going to sacrifice. We're not going to sacrifice, but we're going to pray, and we're not going to eat. We're going to fast all day in memory of Abner, because I want the world to know I had nothing to do with that. And I want the world to know I had nothing, nor I do not approve, nor do I co-conspire, nor do I agree, nor do I come into any tacit agreement in any respect with anything the United States is doing in coordination with Israel to kill those people in Gaza.
And, to be honest, Steve, that's part of my my fulfillment when I go on Press TV, Iranian television, who never tells me what to say or what not to say, never gives me any guidance, really. This is the topic. We welcome your opinion. And the same with RT. When I go on, I'm speaking for myself, but I've said on Iranian TV, the real Christians, not the Christian Zionists, but the real men of God, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. They are not on this side of this genocide. And the real Christians, like myself, are on the side of Iran, of Russia, not politically, but morally, spiritually and morally. That's not to say their political systems are perfect, but there's more compassion, there's more humanity. They're not bombing and killing people. So to be, a voice of American Western society, I think is very significant that they're hearing from someone that there are good men left in America. What did it say? If there's 5 good men or righteous men, I won't burn the city or the country down.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of other commentators who come on these channels and talk, but that's the impression I constantly try and get across. The good men in America are not on this side. We're passionately against it and condemn it, but we're not in the halls of Congress or the White House, and we're not in these positions, but we are spiritually all John the Baptist roaring in the wilderness that this is evil. This is being done by the United States, and it is evil being done in Israel and being done in Ukraine.
Yeah. And there will be a price to pay on the United States. And this is a price that it cannot be avoided, because the truth is that the United States cannot stop itself from supporting Israel in this regard. They've all taken their bribes. They're all owned. They're all bought and paid for. They have their power as a result of what Israel did for them in getting them elected. So they have no choice. So the United States is not an autonomous nation. Now, if you go back historically, Scott, this was the situation in Britain when Rome was controlling Britain under its ecclesiastical courts and making decisions that would supersede the authority of the king in respect of private property, in respect of the nobility, in respect of the provisions of the criminal law or the civil law. Well, you could go to a court of equity, an ecclesiastical court, and have Rome overrule the king. And Henry VIII said, no, you're done with that. We're not doing that anymore. You're out. Now, will the United States reassert its sovereignty? When here, Russia looks at Ukraine and says, Ukraine isn't making any decisions. There's no state there. There's no government there. There is no national fabric there. There's no nation there. All there is a battlefield that's being armed with NATO weapons
That's
and
right.
being governed by the United States State Department. It's not even NATO. It is coming directly out of Washington, D.C., the Department of Defense. And I don't even know who it is in the Department of Defense that's making the decisions, but it's somebody that doesn't really care whether or not we get into nuclear war.
Yes.
So because Ukraine is not a failed state, they're looking to the U.S. and saying it's the U.S. that's doing it. But we as American citizens look to the U.S. and say, what decisions are you making? They're not making decisions on behalf of us because they're not making decisions here either. The decisions are made in Tel Aviv.
Yes.
That's the decisions in the United States.
That's what I said on Press TV, actually. The one guy was on there the other day. I'll dig it out and play it later, but he said, the United States is giving direction to Israel and they're doing this. And I said, no, Israel is commanding and controlling the United States by exactly what you said. They've put them in power, they've bribed them, they've run their campaigns, they've given them all this. And in a sense, they've put the null in their ear. You belong to us. And Mike Johnson and Trump and all of these others and Jim Jordan and even Rand Paul, I've heard them all say this to my offense of their adoration, their prostate, glorification of Israel, and this nostalgic propaganda and brainwashing and self-hypnosis of Israel being God's chosen people and to bless them we'll be blessed and all of this stuff. It is a sick hurricane twister of lies and death. And I agree with you. I think the United States, because of all of the pain and suffering and evil that we've inflicted on the nations from Afghanistan to Iraq to Syria to Libya, all of that has to be visited upon the United States. And all of the idols, and the dollar is the foundation for all of these idols, and everything else, I think has to come collapsing down like a house of cards.
Well,
I don't know how it's going to happen, but it's going to happen, I sense.
Yeah, it has to happen before there's going to be change in America.
Yes.
Change is absolutely a necessity. We have to leave this filth that we're in right now.
Yes.
We're in the pigsty. We're rolling around in pig feces. That's what the country's doing sociologically. And the disease alone is going to kill us. And now you can see that the people that have fallen for this mess, they're just considered cannon fodder for the biofascism that is now barking at the door.
Yeah.
And the fascism is saying, okay, we got rid of those Americans that had an expectation of constitutionalism, that had an idea of American exceptionalism, that believed in manifest destiny, that believed in fundamental freedoms, the freedom of speech, the constitutionally protected rights of the right to private property, the right to the American dream, to pursue, to go after the American dream to the best of your ability. Those people have to be eliminated. They have to be eliminated and they have to be replaced with people who don't have that expectation. So Biden opens up the border, which he's now saying Kamala Harris opened up the border. And Biden is saying it wasn't my economic policies, it was Kamala Harris. So Biden is playing this perfectly, by the way, and I want to hand it to Joe. And I don't know if it was Joe's idea or Jill's idea, but it's a judo move. Hey, I'm mentally incompetent. All the decisions you see that wreck the economy, those were all Kamala Harris's ideas. Those were all her ideas, not mine. I was sitting back.
Do you think they're setting her up for an assassination to remove her? Is there how is this musical chairs going to happen? Because I don't think she's going to last.
She's a complete disaster, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
She's a complete disaster. And, the more that the media tries to claim that she's already won the election, the more the whole election scheme and the media become they're so discredited that when Stephen Colbert was interviewing a CNN journalist live and said to her, well, we know that CNN is an objective news organization that only reports the facts, the audience broke out laughing, thought he was telling a big joke. That tells you something right there. I mean, look, their credibility is gone. And when we look at what's going on in the Democrat Party, there is so much confusion going on where you and I think, well, they must be thinking this or thinking that. They're not thinking anything. These guys are completely out of control. They've got a system. They claim to be Democrats fighting on behalf of democracy, and they put a woman in the Democratic nomination who didn't receive the vote of one person anywhere ever. to hold this position? Nowhere. Nobody voted for her. What are you talking about? How did she get the nomination? There's nobody voted for her. And this is, again, Nancy Pelosi wielding her butt, throwing her butt around and forcing everybody to bow to her will. And, and this whole business, that's why I don't think that they know what they're doing. They've got a bunch of people, you've got agents outside the DNC that are controlling. One of them is the Pelosi crime family, which includes Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
Another is the Soros crime family, which controls the prosecutors in all the swing states. And so these two families are doing a lot of controls to regulate what's happening in the DNC. And neither one of them are talking to each other. I've got my little place, you got your little place. So Nancy is trying to figure out how to manage this disaster because she never took into account that, gee, Joe's got dementia. That never crossed her mind, right? And you can't get Di-Fi out of the grave and put her back in there, bring out that old moldy corpse and see if you can shove her up on the platform. You can't do that. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do, Nancy? What are you going to do? And they don't have an answer because they have no bench. They have no bench. What they have is a bunch of corrupted individuals who have been looting the American economy now since 1992. They've been looting the American economy. And that looting job is now about to come to an end because there's nothing left to loot. So we've arrived at a point, Scott, where we have a severely weakened military.
Yes.
Severely weakened. And we're going to try to demonstrate how much power we have left by putting 6,500 JDAMs in the hands of the Israelis and shipping them a bunch more F-15s and a bunch more F-35s like they don't have enough aircraft. And all of this fiasco is going to come to no end. It's going to come to no end for anybody because ultimately what's going to happen is Russia is going to move now with punishment against Kiev. They're going to move with punishment. And I suspect that the kind of punishment that's going to come is going to be, we no longer respect your ass. We're no longer going to just sustain ourselves with a battle against military targets in Donetsk to repel you from Russian republics. Now we're going to actively destroy your massive infrastructure. Yeah. So they're expecting now a huge missile strike on Kiev that's going to be obliterating. They're going to turn Kiev into rubble.
Yes.
Attack civilians in Kursk. The Russians are going to turn Kiev into rubble.
Yes.
And there's no discussion with Zelensky anymore. The department is trying to scrap rid of Zelensky now, right?
You're going into Kursk with the instructions to shoot men in the legs and throw them in the basements of their homes to cripple them. And any men with guns, you shoot and kill. So that's civilians. You're not soldiers, but the Ukrainian soldiers going in shooting Russian civilians in Kursk. This is their orders. And then you go and start trying to shoot up and blow up a nuclear power plant. Why? To think that you're going to suddenly invade into Kursk on the anniversary of the Kursk submarine. I mean, this is thought out of half-wit Hollywood eighth grader minds, right? Oh, well, let's pick the Kursk date. When the date of the Kursk submarine sank, we're going to invade Kursk. Oh, yeah, we'll go to Kursk on the day of the Kursk submarine, and then we'll capture the city, and then we'll go, now you have to give us back Donbass, and we'll give you back Kursk. Without any concept of the Russian, and I said this on multiple Russian TV interviews I did, they don't understand. The Russians look at Kursk and Belgorod and Cherubinka as part of their body. These are fingers on the hand of Russia. They will never allow these to be taken. They will go, and Russians do this. Their identity, their history, their future is rooted in their land. And you go into their land, not the Donbass, not these new republics, Lugansk and Donetsk. You're going into Russian land in Belgorod, in Cherubinka, in Kursk. You have crossed a line that nobody understands, how the Russians turn from a golden retriever into a werewolf when you do stuff like that. And they're about to transform. The full moon is rising. And they know how to do it, right? They never rush in. They choose the time and the ground. But you're right. They're going to transform. And I'll put it this way. I think they did this too, as weird as it sounds. I think they did this to generate media hits in the U.S. media, in Sky News media, in the British media. Guess what? We've got the invasion of the Kursk. Oh, the Ukrainians, tune in next hour, right? Oh, we've got pictures coming. Tune in next hour, brought to you by Pfizer, right? It was a money-making thing for these fucking media half-wit in America. We've got new reports. The Ukrainians are launching, ABC, NBC, BBC, and it was to generate the fat, dullard simpletons. What? Oh, we gotta watch what's happening. Watch. Whoa. And it was like a weekend of gross money for the media companies. It's went nowhere. But now the tsunami is going to come rushing back and wipe out everything. I think along the lines you're talking about. I would add that I think they need. I've said this for a long time too. Russia needs to go into Odessa and make Odessa a separate republic. Peel itself away from Ukraine and Kiev. Set up special mercenaries to kill all of these Ukrainian soldiers that are trying to kidnap people. Set up all sorts of internal division, internal civil. I said the more you trigger civil war in Ukraine, the faster the war outside is going to end.
You're talking about triggering a civil war with what? The women that are left.
That's right. You've
I mean,
killed our men, and now you're trying to come and take our daughters to throw them in to the front line.
this is the whole thing. You can't trigger a civil war with 750,000 widows, right? But I can tell you what you can do. When you reduce Kiev to nothing, you reduce Kiev to nothing, to a rubble. It gets, you give it the Dresden treatment, the Frankfurt treatment. You give it the Dresden treatment. You say that's that. There. Now what are you defending? They're defending nothing. At this point, the people who are living their lives in Kiev, and they're living their lives with blinders. Okay, we dig Heil at the flag in the morning, and then we go down to the market and we get our clothing and we do our little job and we go out and have coffee and at Maidan, and we do this, we do that. All of that stuff is fine. You can pretend until there's no Kiev.
Yeah.
When there's no, then you're done pretending. Okay. And I think you're right. I think there's absolutely no question in my mind right now that the one solution to ending this war is to completely deprive Ukraine of any access to the Black Sea. And that means taking Odessa and Nikolaev as well, taking both those places, taking them and containing them, and then holding off the Ukrainian state. Say that's it. You're done. You don't have any more. You don't have any anything. And then but the point is, when Putin comes out and says, first of all those idiots that went into Kursk, the ones that lived that aren't dead, which most of them are dead.
Yeah.
But the ones that lived are being held prisoner, and they're going to be tried as terrorists, not as
absolutely.
And they're going to get 50-year sentences in Siberian prisons with no chance for early release. They'll be dead in a year. They'll be beaten to death in a Russian prison.
That's right.
And and that's going to be that. And because who are they going to be facing? Future members of Wagner, right? That are in prison, right? The future members of Wagner.
Yes.
The recruitment offices in Russia are off the hook. When they came first, everybody and their brothers like, okay, I'm ready to go. Send me down there. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to send me down there. I'm ready to go. So you can see that, and I think Russia is going to make the move, and Russia is going to make the move, and it's going to be a concentrated strike. In other words, I don't think Russia is going to move unilaterally without the motion of Iran. Okay. And I think, if Iran is looking at this and saying, okay, look, the United States just shipped in 6,500 JDAMs. The longer we wait, the more weapons come in. So that's something to consider. Now, this idea of moving the Georgia off the coast, the submarine, and it doesn't have to be off the coast of Iran. It could be anywhere in the Indian Ocean, maybe potentially in the Mediterranean Ocean, and hit targets in Iran. I don't think they'd put it in the Mediterranean Ocean. That strikes me as particularly stupid. But if they put it in the Indian Ocean, they've got plenty of range on those Tridents. And so if those ballistic missiles are in fact armed with nuclear weapons, this again, the first one to use the nuke here is going to lose absolutely horrifically, because the response to the limited use of nukes is going to be an overwhelming nuclear response.
And no one would shed a tear if Washington, D.C. suddenly collapsed into smoldering ashes.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that. And the thing is that again, we're looking at a situation here in the States that is dominated by the dollar. Remember, you might think that American power is projected by its aircraft carriers and its B-52 bombers and blah, 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 but it's not. American power 100% depends upon the credibility of the dollar.
Well, see, and that leads us to the other speculation, I think, and I think it's valid. I've said it for a long, long time, and others start chiming and saying the same thing, essentially from different positions, Alex Jones and elsewhere, is that they are going to be setting off false flag attacks in the United States that include nuclear events. Could they blow up Washington, D.C.? Absolutely. They need to erase, like you said, everything that has come before. They need to erase all of the people that think they have constitutional rights. Therefore, you need to erase the seat of all historical memory and identity of this old republic, which is Washington. So why wouldn't the Democrats blow up a nuclear bomb in Washington, D.C. at a time when maybe they go out for August recess or something like that, or whatever, or Christmas? I think it would be soon before the election. Why not blow up Washington, D.C. when everybody is in transition, and then say, oh, it was done by Iran and Russia? So we now are in lockdown in America, martial law, no more elections, everything's suspended. Oh, Kamala Harris and the guy's been killed, so now it's going to go here and there. I think they're going to set off a nuclear event. I wouldn't be surprised if Washington, D.C. is the target. And
Yeah.
they do it and they blame it on Russia or Iran or both.
Well, all the fingers are pointing at Iran now. Iran is now the boogeyman. Russia's no longer the boogeyman. Iran's now the boogeyman. Why? Because Israel told them Iran is the boogeyman.
But you can't touch Iran, because Iran's going to have all of, as you said, the best missile defense systems that Russia can provide, and China can provide, and India.
Oh, yeah. And they're being flown in daily. I mean, the Anatovs are landing there, the great big Anatovs, the great big birds. Those are flying weapons into Iran now. And so that means they're moving lots and lots of gear. And of course, the Iranians in exchange have given Russia intermediate range missiles, but the Russians are now fitting with nuclear weapons. So instantly, whereas the Pentagon had calculated, it'll take Russia a year and a half, 2 years before they can install intermediate range missiles to compete with our intermediate range missiles in Germany. No, it took them 2 weeks. Now they've got all range missiles in there, and they're retrofitting nuclear weapons on top of them. So guess what? The treaty's over, and now boom, here's 1,000 intermediate range nuclear weapons facing you.
Oh, Russia can't create 1,000,000 chopsticks. It's going to take them a year. Guess what? China just gave it to them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what the problem is. And so at any rate, the demise of America is really around the corner because the dollar has been so devalued. Now, the dollar, since Biden took office, has lost 25% of its purchasing power. 25%. Now, that's a general average statistic based upon worldwide goods. But you can see now, if you go into the store and you take a look, they're telling us the inflation rate was 2.9% last month. Yeah, that's 2.9% per week, maybe. I mean, they're not giving you true numbers. The fact of the matter is that the prices have skyrocketed on all kinds of goods and services, including insurance, which is the number one increasing item in the country. The cost of insuring anything is going up because, of course, its replacement cost is going through the roof. So, of course, insurance rates are going to go up to cover replacement costs, right? And this is and it's not going up because the value is improving. It's going up because of the inflationary spiral and the demise of the dollar. So when you see this kind of inflation rate, you should be seeing the Dow Jones at 35,000, 38,000, 40,000. You're not seeing that. And the reason you're not seeing that is because there is we already saw the echoes of the correction that happened last Monday. Floor's gone. Quick, everybody close the trap door. All right, now everybody get back into quantitative easing and let's start pumping up these stocks again. Let's get the Bank of Japan dumping money into this thing, and we're not talking about the Asian flu of 1998 when the Hong Kong currency collapsed, or 97 when George Soros collapsed the Hong Kong currencies.
Which the Chinese have a hatred for him for doing, and they've written about this in their books, Irregular Warfare.
Yeah. Well, he capitalized on that market. And when he did, of course, he gutted Hong Kong and its ability to maintain its freedom for 50 years under the agreement with Britain after the land lease closed. And in addition to that, he caused a collapse of the Asian markets, which then caused a collapse of the Latin markets, which then caused a collapse of the European markets, which then would have collapsed the American market. But Greenspan began quantitative easing in August of 1998. And he was quantitative easing to the tune of about 200 billion a month going into the markets to shore up the stock market. And he did that all the way through to 2001 when George Bush took office. And the beginning of 2001, he said, that's it, we're done with quantitative easing. And he cut it off, which of course caused the markets to do the single largest correction in a single day since, I don't know, 87 in April. And the floor fell out of the NASDAQ and a correction began. I mean, it was a 60% correction on the NASDAQ, 40% correction on the Dow over that summer. And what cured it? 9/11, right? And so arguably, Alan Greenspan's suspension of quantitative easing in order to punish a Republican and to reward the Democrat that was in office caused the collapse that then caused the deep state to decide we need a false flag to propel us into a military industrial complex driven social order.
Yes.
And we've been ever since.
Yes, a perennially expanding military empire.
Yeah, and that military empire is now becoming a joke. Our
Yeah.
our ability to make 155 millimeter artillery rounds is gone because that factory got blown up. We have to go to China to get our ammunition. We have to go to China to get our resources. We have to go to China to get our parts. And we've got all these ridiculous machines that were built on the idea that the more technical we make these machines, the better they're going to be. Well, you know what? The Russians have a different point of view. The simpler the machine is. All right, now let me give you an example. Let me just talk about my brother-in-law for a minute. He bought two machines. One was he bought the Russian Sherp. It's called the Sherp. Anyway, this machine, this is a off-road vehicle, right? And so it's got tires, airless tires that are 40 inches tall. And they're airless, 48 inches tall.
Wow, that's a soft ride.
Yeah. Now it's basically just a steel boat. It's a steel boat with a cab over the top of it. It's got a diesel in it, and it's got these 48-inch tires.
Yeah.
Very simple thing. So he just goes out, man. He goes over rocks and he goes over trees and he goes through, it floats, so you can river with it and you can do this. It's not very fast. I think 5 miles an hour or something. It's very slow. But if you're out bear hunting or you're doing something like this is the perfect off-road vehicle. Goes anywhere and everywhere.
Yes.
And he bought the American equivalent, which is called a fat tire. And this has got basically the same size tires, only it's got the American cab with the heater. It's got the computers. It's got this. It's got that. It's got all the other fancy dancy stuff. And of course, guess what? Computer problems, computer signals, error codes coming up. The very first year he had it, error codes coming up. This doesn't work. That doesn't work. The other thing doesn't work. It's like they tell that story about when they got up in the International Space Station and they realized that a pen won't work in space. So the Americans spent $12 million developing a pen that would work in space. The Russians switched to a pencil.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, this is the kind of thinking that goes on. Now, the difference is this. We've got F-35s that are complex to beat the band, $400 million software package that went into that thing, all these computer chips and everything else that are simply switched off with one GPS signal. Now, just like a Tesla car. Gee, your battery's dead. Now what? You can't get out of the car. You can't open the door. You can't roll down the window. You can't you can't do anything. You're just sitting there in a big metal thing that's closed up. And it's the same thing with an F-35. One switch, F-35, nothing's working. I can't get anything to start. Well, just hit that switch. Just use the remote, right? Just use your controller. That should get it to work. No. Everything's Bluetooth, everything's this, everything else. It's all fancy. Same thing with the Abrams, right? Abrams has got all these fancy systems in there. Okay, great. These systems are really complex and fantastic. And they require maintenance that's never ending maintenance. How about something simple that works? Could we get that, right? Go back to the old Shermans if you need to. At least you got something that's functioning.
Yes.
And, so this is the kind of thing that we're seeing. And so because of this, now we've got, better than half our Navy is mothballed, better than half of our planes of the F-35s we have, better than half of them are sitting on the tarmac. They can't fly.
Everything that the United States possesses as a military craft in the Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, in all of those areas will be sunk to the bottom in 1 hour.
Yeah,
I think
you're right. I think you're right. I mean, the hypersonics, we don't have the capability of deterring the hypersonics, which, listen, we're talking about American sailors here, right? We're talking about American sailors that are on those ships. And it infuriates me that ignoramuses who've never been to war are sitting here deploying
That's right.
America that kind of a situation
But
with
it's survival, right? Either Iran allows its cities to be bombed and based, bombed and missiled and all that, or it takes out the missile boats. And Russia does the same thing. There
yeah,
and they're, we're provoking it. We're doing all of it, but it's going to annihilate the United States military capacity,
yeah,
and everything else is going to implode. Everything is going to come upon this nation into a combustion, a hurricane of police state, internal civil war, domestic, assertions of power, assertion. Oh, there's a new scamdemic too. So we have to make sure everybody get. They have no moral restraint. They have no idea. That's the thing, Stephen. The fool returns to his folly like a dog returns to his vomit. They're going to return to the folly of, well, we're going to decree that you have to wear masks, so you have to wear a mask. We did it in 2019 and 2022. We're going to do it again. So you have to do it. We've decreed it. No, everybody learned. Oh, guess what? The YouTube CEO, Wojcicki, she just died at 56.
that's because
Everybody's learned. We're not going to ever let you do it again.
yeah, she died at 56 because she didn't listen to any of the videos she canceled.
That's right.
If you listened to those videos, she might have known something,
Yep.
but she didn't listen because she had her mind made up, and her mind made up is what cost her, right? And you're right. I mean, but it's not, but I think these people are predicting, oh, we're going to be able to control the American society. Have you noticed the kind of problems we've been having with internet lately? The kind of problems we're having with the grid? And, and if you think we've had problems so far, this San Francisco judge that's now said that Google Play Store is an illegal monopoly. And so there's a breakup coming at Google right now. There's a huge breakup coming.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I can tell you, when Google loses its monopoly on Google Play, that means all of these apps that are available out there are going to become available freelance into Androids, which means that Androids can be divorced from Google surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
Your smartphone away from their surveillance protocol and get all the apps you want, loading them from other sources. This is a very huge lawsuit. This is also going to cause Google to lose control over its internet facilities. And when the Azure cloud of Microsoft failed during the CrowdStrike thing, that the CrowdStrike was the scapegoat for that thing. There were failures going on before that CrowdStrike load hit. That was 16 million terminals worldwide that suffered failure as a result of that cloud. And I can tell you that's just the bare beginning. We haven't yet seen what's going to happen when Huawei introduces its new AI through its phones that are going to be able to integrate into the United States without Google Play being able to control it through a CIA functionality, which is what Google is. Google is the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, you're going to see functionality take place. Now, what's happening in the virtual world is also going to happen in the physical world. They think they're going to be able to control, we're going to do this, we're going to launch a pandemic, we're going to put these kind of controls in place, we're going to do that. There's going to be competing mafias that are going to arise now, big time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, the drug running cabals out of northern Mexico, those two big families. Those families already have huge controls in Phoenix. They have huge controls in San Diego and LA. They have huge controls in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and well into Texas. Those families are going to be asserting control on the street. And so you're going to see a different kind of control. You're going to have somebody coming to you, the local bureaucrat, the apparatchik, is going to come to you and say, you have to have a mask on and you have to do this. And he's going to have this weak set of protocols while there's gang tagging going on every corner. And that gang tag, you're going to know what that gang tag is and who it belongs to and to whom you owe taxes. You'll owe taxes to that gang tag a long time before you're going to owe taxes to the IRS. A long time before that. And you're already starting to see barter protocol is breaking out across the country. People are starting to engage in barter. And the people who have methodologies on barter are really the ones who are developing a skill set that's going to be needed. So you're going to see the long and the short of it is all the control network that has been in place that's been utilizing these controls, these digital controls, which is really a facade where they try to scare you into believing that they have all these controls when they don't. All of those controls are going to fail. And in the middle of that comes the failure of the dollar. And the failure of the dollar, I mean, look, these guys, these people who are controlled by Israel cannot make their own decision. They cannot act autonomously. They cannot stop the spending. They cannot even address the issues that are before them. They cannot speak up on behalf of the American people. They cannot. And so they do not, and they will not. And as a consequence, the spending has no chance of being abated. So we're going to cross the threshold at the end of the year with about $38 trillion in debt, with looking at the 2025, the increase in that debt by probably another $10 trillion. The number one budget item is already the interest on the national debt, and that number is going to exceed tax revenue this year. That number is going to exceed tax revenue. You know how many people are failing in this country? There's no possible way they're going to be paying taxes. When you have $1.5 trillion in credit card debt, who's going to be paying taxes? They can't run it up on their credit card, that's for sure. So what are you talking about? You're talking about an explosion of homelessness. You're talking about an implosion of auto prices, an implosion of home prices, an implosion of appliances and commodities. All of this stuff coming crashing down while the dollar goes through the roof. It's hyperinflation of the currency and deflation of real prices at the same time as supply completely dries up. Because nobody is going to be selling anything to the United States because nobody can pay real currency to buy it. There won't be any currency you can use to get the food that's coming in from Costa Rica or from Mexico or the coffee that comes in from Honduras or Colombia. Any of that stuff, none of that stuff is going to come in because there's no buyer, because nobody can buy it, because they don't have any money. So this is how this situation quickly evolves into a very devastating anarchy. Now, I'm telling you, Dmitry Orlov made a very good point. America is already a failed state. It's a failed state. Right now, it's a failed state. We had a corrupted election in 2020 to put in a demented individual into the office of the presidency who has not managed a thing, to allow looters to loot their respective positions to the maximum degree they could possibly get away with. That's why there was $200 billion sent to Ukraine. Because all of that was money they were looting. And they told you point blank, oh, none of that money is going to Ukraine. It's all going to our friends. It's all going to these military contractors. These are all our friends. And we're getting kickbacks from that in our campaign contributions. Just like the whatever money actually lands in Zelensky's pocket when he was taking a commission. I don't know if it was 10% or what it was, but he was taking a commission. And of course, look, you think Russia doesn't know where his casino is in Cyprus? You think Russia doesn't know where his house is in Britain? You think they don't know where his house is in Miami? Go home, Zelensky. You're going to be kicked out by the State Department in this month anyway. You're going to be completely removed. And once you're removed, you go home. But, you better learn that old Czechoslovakian term, Molotov. Molotov. Because the chances of you surviving the home fire in the middle of the night are about zero.
Right.
And so, this is the kind of thing, Scott. So when we're talking about this, the failed state, we can sit here and propose and say, hey, look, we could do this. We could do that. It used to be we'd spend time. What's the way out of this? What's the way out of this? How can we get out of this? And the answer is there is no getting out of it. Not for the United States, not anymore. We had a chance to get out of it. If Trump had stayed away from the pandemic, we had a chance to get out of it.
If he had done anything to combat his overthrow, and he didn't. He signed up with the pandemic, and I don't believe any of the nonsense about, it was according to the plan, and he had to do this, bullshit. I'm not buying any of those Muppet Show, sideshow justifications. I'm going by the simplest facts. The simplest facts are he backed the pandemic, he backed the vaccine, he allowed the mail-in ballots, he allowed his own overthrow, he's backed Poroshenko and giving weapons to Ukraine. This bullshit about it would never have happened if I was president. Bullshit. You were doing it. You caused it. You caused this overthrow by not standing up against Poroshenko. Oh, and then they impeached you over allegedly over questioning if that wasn't all a sideshow too. and pulling out of the JCPOA, pulling out of Iran. Nothing but belligerency in foreign policy. You kill the George Washington of Iran, General Soleimani, because the Israeli Zionists and Pompeo tell you to, and you bomb Syria, and then you want to keep the oil, and then you try and overthrow Venezuela's Juan Guaido, or I'm sorry, Maduro, and put in Juan Guaido, who is the equivalent of who's that skinny punk kid who rides a skateboard in Texas, who is this little faggoty, I can't remember his name, tall guy, Irish name. But Trump was behind all of this. See, he doesn't get a pass. You're right, Stephen. We are in a failed state, and it's only going to, the car. Look, we're all riding on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. We're on the Beverly Hillbillies truck, right? And now we'll just get ready. The wheels are going to come off. The engine's going to fall out. The doors are going to fall out. The whole car is going to crumble. You're not, because God is the breath in your lungs, and you're going to keep on keeping on, and He will protect His people, His children. He will create bubbles for us. That doesn't mean we're going to have internet. We're going to have all the things we have. No, get ready for the lean years, right? The 7 years of want, the fat bulls eaten by the skinny ones. The lean years are coming upon this country, and all of the suffering that has been inflicted on the world is going to be inflicted on America. Be ready to watch it. I wanted to transition before we close, Stephen. You're going to go to London, and I think you're in a very opportune time. You're going over there. You are going to witness and sense and acquire by your observation what is happening on this theater of the Britons rising up against the police, the government, the blacks who were the black Muslims, but the immigrants that have come in that have been killing their 3-year-old little girls. You're entering the moment of V for Vendetta in Britain. I'm just curious what you expect to be encountering over there.
Because I am, I have my finger on that pulse there pretty tightly. And so, for instance, I have an idea what the attitude is in Belfast, Northern Ireland. I know what the attitude is in Liverpool. I know what the attitude is in Leeds. I know what the attitude is in Birmingham, in London. I know what the attitude is in Cornwall and Cardiff. I got and in Edinburgh and Glasgow. I mean, I got a pretty good idea what's going on there. And I can tell you that there's a couple of things. First of all, the British people that I know have come to me and said, okay, well, what is the status on the common law? The common law, of course, is a big deal in England. It's still the law of the land. And the common law is, there's a constitution in Britain, but it's not written in a single document. It's written in a number of documents. For instance, the Magna Carta is part of that constitution. The English Bill of Rights of 1689, the acts of cession bringing Scotland into the country, the act of cession bringing Ireland into the country, the act of cession bringing Wales into the country. These are all part and parcel of the Constitution. And its binding document is, of course, the 1689 Bill of Rights. And this 1689 Bill of Rights was developed at the time that they had overthrown the line of David, the kings in the line of David, which the last one was James II, who was a corrupted individual who did many illegal acts against the United Kingdom by trying to reinstate Catholicism.
Yes.
And when he tried to do that, there was a civil war that broke out. Actually, the civil war had started in 1534 with Henry VIII outlawing Catholicism.
Yes.
Continued until the victory of William and Mary of Orange at the Battle of the Boyne in Ireland, and William and Mary assuming the throne in Britain, the House of Hanover, which was approved by Parliament to supersede the House of the Line of David that had gone from Bran the Blessed forward. And so, at any rate, when you see William and Mary come in, this Bill of Rights is very clear. And the things that it declared to be illegal are exactly what the Starmer government is doing right now. The idea of arming one group of people against the Protestants of the country, the idea of announcing fines and penalties before there's been a crime charged, the idea of excessive bail or withholding bail, like 20 months for a Facebook post. All of these excesses are in violation of the English Bill of Rights. Now, the English Bill of Rights is still the dominant law in Britain.
Mhm.
And when you're talking about Muslims, I mean, I had some good discussions with the Muslims in London the last time I was there. They
Mhm.
wanted me to speak down at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, in fact. And I
Mhm.
would have spoken if I'd had the time. I would have gone down there and had some discussion with the imams and
Yes.
talked the name of Yahweh rather than the name of Allah, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so you have to keep in mind that I don't have a problem with Muslims generally speaking.
Right.
Okay.
Neither do I. Neither do I.
Okay. So, but the thing is, when you're talking about in Britain, the common law is dominant. The common
Yeah.
law has been in place since 581 BC has been the common law in Britain. It's dominant in Britain. There is nothing that is outside the scope of the common law, including the acts of parliament. Now, Blackstone tried to say, well, parliament is the ultimate, is the penultimate and the ultimate. Well, absolutely not. The common law is the ultimate, to which parliament has a duty to ascribe. And
Mhm.
so the question of not the the thing that bothers me, of course, is that the king is asleep at the switch
Mhm.
and he's doing nothing. And the question is William Jewish or is he Muslim? I don't know, but he's certainly not Christian. He's denounced Christianity, will not give the oath that requires him to be the defender of the church. And Charles even co-opted on that oath. And when he co-opted on that oath, the figure of death walked by the doors of Westminster Abbey while he was being crowned, right? I don't know if you saw that video, but the
No.
figure, yeah, you go look. The figure of death walked by the door at the back of the Westminster Abbey while he was being crowned. Okay, so when you look at the Anglican Church, the Anglican authority,
Mhm.
technically they may not want to admit it, but Great Britain, the United Kingdom, is a theocracy. The king has a duty to
Right.
to to defend the faith. And
Defender of the faith. That's the title of the king. That's the title of the queen, which she was there. She was the defender of the faith,
that's
the
correct.
Protestant faith of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior.
That's correct. The Protestant faith. And of course, there's been a great falling away from that faith. And I think, World War I, World War II were a big part of that,
Yep.
whole generations being lost in those wars. And I think the wickedness of Winston Churchill, it was equally a part and parcel of that. But when you get to the late 60s, early 70s with the rise of Jimmy Savile, this pedophile, that was a phenomenal vile predator who was preying on retarded girls and disabled girls in hospitals as part of his methodology. And he was best friends with King Philip and would oftentimes drive Charles around, and they were hanging out together. And Seville has since been completely defamed, and his tombstone was taken down, and they put up a simple tombstone for him, which is what he deserves, actually. But when you talk about the whole of British society, in our group, let Yah arise. Okay, we have many people that are coming together to say, we're not going to be antagonistic to the Starmer government. We're not going to be antagonistic to Islam. We are going to speak in favor of the truth of Scripture.
Amen. Amen. Yes.
We're going to be talking about the elements of the faith and what was the practice, and in particular, what was the practice of Joseph Arimathea when the faith was founded in Britain in 36 AD. The initial foundation of the faith, which, by the way, continued completely uninterrupted until about 590, when Augustine arrived for the first time as a representative of Rome and began to make war against the faith that had been there solidly in the hands of Joseph Arimathea, and of course Miriam, the mother of Messiah, who was there and buried in Anglesey, right? And Simon the Zealot, who was there, and Aristobulus the fifth, who was anointed by Paul to be the first bishop of London. All of these things are huge factors in the creation of the faith. And when the Britons come to understand that their heritage is rooted in these scriptures right from time immemorial. I've got a friend who lives north of London. He's a great scholar. And he and I have been talking about what the truth is showing up that's coming out of Ireland and what Ireland did and where Ireland was and how much of a huge factor it was in developing all of Europe, in bringing intellectualism to Europe,
Mhm.
and how the Gaelic language has so many similarities to the ancient Hebrew. It's unbelievable. What are we talking about? Well, it's because of Jeremiah in Ireland in 581 BC, showing up with Tia Tefi, marrying Yoked the Harriman, the first high king of Ireland in the house of Zerach, from whom Edward the Bruce would be the last high king, and his brother Robert the Bruce would be the defender of the faith in Scotland, to hold at bay the forces of Rome. And these are just extremely important points. And if you recognize that this is the heritage of the British people, this is their heritage. It's not a bunch of shallow garbage that's handed to you by the BBC, which is like oil on British society. I mean, it doesn't take much. If you go into Cardiff or you go into Glasgow, two beautiful historic cities, there is an ugly boil in downtown Cardiff. That's the BBC building. Its architecture is completely inconsistent with the city. It's some ugly looking 1960s modern looking thing that's just, it blows out everything. It's so completely inconsistent with Cardiff. And it's the same thing in Edinburgh. They got the same ugly building going on in Edinburgh because they're going to drop their ugly boil-like self in the middle of it. And the two dominant forces in Britain are not the Parliament, and it's not Starmer, and it's not any of those political parties. It's the BBC and the NHS. They control Britain. They control Britain. And the NHS has had a huge credibility failure as a result of this pandemic. People are not trusting it anymore. And of course, now you're seeing the British economy absolutely collapse on its face because they don't have access to cheap natural gas anymore. And they can't put a military, they can threaten Russia all day long. They can put their Challenger tanks in there. They can put their Storm Shadow cruise missiles in there. But they've got an army that can't even fill a single football stadium. But they're willing to recruit an army when it comes to smash in the face of Britons who stand up and say, we don't like the fact that somebody was able to slaughter 3 girls with a machete. If you come out and you put any protest on Facebook or anything, there's a guy that just got sentenced to 20 months in jail for a Facebook post, right? Another guy got 12 weeks, no bail, right? And the judges have said, in violation of the English Bill of Rights, we're not going to give you any bail. That was construed in the English Bill of Rights as an illegal act of the king. So I'm not going to say what's going to happen at all. My guy in Britain is Nigel Farage. And I think Nigel Farage is a smart man. And I think he is, not only is he a smart man, but he is really showing the leadership of a true prime minister right now in what he is doing. He's taken a position that is very well articulated. He was the one that led the Brexit. He's the one that that brought Britain out of the Fourth Reich. And the Fourth Reich is collapsing again into a total corporate fascist state. And is going to go into deprivations of poverty now as a result of the Nord Stream being blown up. And so Nigel Farage has negotiated a high diplomatic place, a high diplomatic position. And he is showing the true skills of a really articulated leader. And most of the people who voted reform in Britain wanted Nigel Farage to advance. But because reform was new to the bloc, the protocols of the election allowed Labour to come in and cast off that corrupted politician Rishi Sunak, who was told he was just a banker's accountant. That's all he was. But Starmer is somebody else. I'm not quite sure who Starmer is yet. There's been people that are revealing who he is, but his policies are really quite incredibly anti-British.
Yes.
So I favor Nigel Farage. I'm a supporter of him. And I'm sure he's got his blemishes and his flaws and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, I still am supporting Nigel Farage for the position of prime minister. I don't think Starmer is going to last long. His popularity went chunk. It went right to the floor. So if Labour thinks they're if the Tories think they're the only ones that can be kicked out, wait till Labour sees what happened. Labour's been out of power for a long time because of their complete failure in managing the country, right? They've completely failed. All they wanted to bring in was socialism. But Britain does not have the money to support a socialist environment. They can't do cradle to grave anymore. And in the meantime, these factions that are saying, let's open the door to the World Economic Forum's idea of replacement. Let's replace all those English. Let's replace all those Scots. Let's replace all those Welsh. Let's replace all those Irish with these guys. Mm-hmm. That's not the idea of Starmer. That's not the idea of the King. That's not the idea of the Tories or the Labour Party. That's the idea of the World Economic Forum and these guys bowing down and allowing them to do it to them.
Right.
So, and it's going on in Germany, it's going on in France, it's going on in Italy. Now, Italy and Austria have both recently risen up and have said, you know what, we're not going to do that stuff anymore. And they came out, and both of them have taken a position in favor of Russia. They're saying, look, we're not doing anything in terms of Ukraine anymore. We're done. And of course, Hungary has done the same thing. So has Slovakia. Now, the Russian protocol, in my opinion, the Russian diplomatic protocol should be to invite Viktor Orban and also Fico out of Slovakia and Moroni, the fabulous Irish woman that's running Italy. Maloney, right? That's clearly an Irish name. I mean,
Mhm.
and she's Italian all she wants, but it sounds to me as an Irish name. Bring this Irish girl in and bring them all into Moscow and say, hey, look, why don't you guys join BRICS? Why don't you guys join BRICS? Why don't you join an economic forum that's a future economic forum, a future economic forum that is capable, because clearly Russia is the developing economy,
That's right.
no longer Germany. Germany got hammered by Joe Biden.
See, Russia can make independent trade deals too with these countries. They can go to Italy and say, we'll give you natural gas, we'll give you coal, we'll give you timber, we'll give you oil at a better price than we do the EU. That's how you peel these countries off the EU, this Nazi Gestapo Ursula von der Leyen. No, you go to you go to Ireland, you go to Italy, you go to these countries. Hey, let's give you everything at a quarter of the price that we would charge the EU.
Yeah, and the irony is, Scott, that Belgium, where all this stuff is happening, is about 68% immigrant now. The Netherlands is 53% immigrant, right? So, if they ever had a true democratic vote in any of those countries, those people would be out entirely. And, Germany is already talking about leaving the Schengen relationship right now. So, you can see that the EU and NATO, as a result of losing this war in Ukraine, which they've done, now it's just wrap up. And so because this has happened, NATO is going to collapse and the EU is likely to collapse. And so the question is, do you want to collapse into the kind of economic depression that took place in the 1920s and the 1930s that was absolutely horrific? Or do you want to wisely, and I'm not talking about political alliance, I'm talking about economic alliance.
Yeah.
Do you want to get involved with people who are productive and who are now embracing market economies? What do you want?
And aren't trying to shove rainbow flag homosexual culture down the throats of your children or schools or institutions, and aren't trying to overthrow governments or wage war.
That's right. I mean, the Italian culture is very, very Italian. It's very strongly Italian. The same thing with the Austrian culture is very Austrian. The Slovakian culture, same way. The Hungarian culture, very strong cultures. And these cultures, again, I'm not talking about rejoining the Soviet Union or forming the Warsaw Pact. I'm just saying get into BRICS and get into economic relationships with Russia. And if it costs you your position in the EU, count yourself lucky. Do you remember what the EU said about the pigs? They called Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain pigs. Mm-hmm. These are the pigs, right? Well, if you're the pigs, and and I can guarantee you that Germany pees down their leg when it comes to Greece. That's a fact. So does Britain. And so it would be very much smart, economically smart, for those very same countries, and Austria, and Slovakia, and Hungary, to now move in the direction of Russia. Not only refuse to fight in Ukraine, but also move economically in that direction. Ensure your natural gas for this coming winter. Ensure your oil supplies for this coming winter. And by doing so, you're going to see your productivity in your nation move up dramatically.
Right.
And as compared to what's going to happen the rest, I mean, who wants to hang out with Macron and Brigitte? Right? Hanging out with France is like taking a swim in the Seine.
Yeah. Well, we've said this before. We've said this for a long time. The economic realignment of Europe is naturally going to happen as a result of the civil wars in Europe that are erupting because of the migration. And now we're seeing the writing on the wall. We're seeing it happen. And I think you're right. It may take they may have to go through this winter of suffering before they have common sense kick them in the head and Russia to say, okay, we'll give you a chance, and they'll be stiff-necked. But I think eventually it's going to take this direction, because you're going to have people rise up in Italy who are going to overthrow the leaders. There'll be people in Germany and Britain and elsewhere. They're going to rise up and say, no, we've had enough. You're done. You're out. We don't believe in the Green Party anymore or any other bullshit party. Alternative for Germany, you need some real manly warriors up there that are going to do exactly what you're talking about, Stephen. Realigning in a snap the shoulder, back in joint, hard hit, quick, realign with Russia, get your oil, get your resources, end all hostility. It's morning in America again. The prodigal son or the prodigal father embrace. Done. The past is dead. Now we move forward. It can happen that quick in a political revolutionary sense. Starmer and all these guys, they can all be killed like Mussolini and killed and then replaced the next day. Hitler killed and replaced after the ashes and the ruins and the rubble were recollected and all that. I see this happening potentially very quickly. Steve, we're almost out of time. I'm going to give you the last few minutes. Give us your closing thoughts. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to close with this, Scott. There's an old saying up here, an old joke up here in Alaska, right? Two guys are walking along in the woods, and suddenly a great big grizzly shows up. Run! And they start running. And the one guy looks at the other and says, I'm not quite sure I can outrun a bear. The other guy says, well, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the same situation here. Whichever the two groups, the Europe or the United States, makes the decision first to abandon this LGBT garbage, whoever is first to abandon that and re-embrace the sane world is going to be the country that's going to survive.
It's going to be Europe. It's going to be Europe.
Yeah, I think so. I think Europe is going to be the first to embrace it, or parts of Europe.
Yes.
Anybody who's a problem with immigration, ship your migrants back to France, Belgium, and Germany. Mm-hmm. That's where you ship them to. Don't ship them back to Africa or any of that. Ship them back to France and Germany and Belgium. And then when everybody gets tired of, Belgium is already overwhelmed, but, Ursula von der Leyen needs to have all of those immigrants living next.
Absolutely.
And, and the sooner you do that, the better off you are. But portions of Europe are going to peel off. Orban's already made it clear. Fico's already made it clear. Greece needs to rethink its position, get back in line with the Orthodox people that are part of its culture. And the same thing with Spain and Portugal, and Italy. Get out of there. Get out of the EU and get with some people that know productivity when they see it, right? And again, you can be selling Ferraris again. Hey, sounds good to me. But that's why I'm saying the one who is the first to conform and return to sanity leaves the other one to be eaten by the bear. So I'm going to leave it right there.
Yeah, I think you're right. And people had better be prepared in the United States and having all their toys and trinkets and all of their training and all of their networks and everything, all their comms, their water, their food. People need to be ready for at least a year to be self-sufficient and be cold-blooded and merciless in preserving your life, your property, and the lives and property of your friends and family, and looking to live within your 20-mile by 20-mile square. Nothing really matters outside of that. This is where we're going. Like you said, Stephen, the city of the walled cities and stuff. We're going into that. It's going to be interesting. Someone, I was listening, and I'll end it real quick here. But I was listening. I think it was Mearsheimer or someone that was on Napolitano, and Napolitano is kind of an idiot, but he has some smart people on the show. And Mearsheimer had said the societies, when they're invaded, the police often join the side of the invaders. And I thought, wow. And he said, and he actually, I think he qualified by saying this is happening in Britain. The invaders, these Muslim blacks, retards, whatever you want to call them, coming and killing little girls, the police are siding with them, right? And he said, this will cause the police to be killed. This will cause the police to be hated, and their families and their children hated. So there was a whole conversation about how the police are, if they choose to go with the invaders against their indigenous people, especially the Britons. The British people, Stephen. When they are their backs against the fire, you see them rise up like the Russians rise up. and fight like no other human beings on the planet can fight.
Well, when you talk about the British, invented cruelty in battle.
Mhm.
They invented it. And, when you talk about these, Charles I made the same mistake. He decided to embrace Catholicism, French Catholics and Irish Catholics, at the expense of the British people.
Mhm.
Fate of Charles I is well known. He was beheaded by Oliver Cromwell.
Right. We will see what happens. Stephen Pidgeon, always a pleasure, always enlightening. Thank you so much for your time. It's very refreshing and people need it and love it very much. And thank you for joining us on Great Awakenings. Thank you to Tong, our producer, for his patience. And we will be back next week. We thank you for joining us. God bless you. Good night.